Business owner with disturbing history kills two. A longtime business owner in Anoka County was speeding north on Highway 65 in East Bethel yesterday during rush hour when he suddenly changed lanes and T-boned a car crossing Highway 65. Although he has a history of road rage, driving while intoxicated, causing a personal injury in another crash, and has more speeding tickets than he can recall, the police had very few questions for him and decided to focus their investigation on the driver of the car instead. At this time, it's not clear why the police decided to ignore his prior driving history and his admission that he was not maintaining a proper lookout in heavy rush hour traffic. Also not clear is how the businessman still has a driver's license, who he may be related to, or why the police apparently feel the driver of the car, who had a spotless record, was solely responsible for the crash which resulted in her death and the death of her passenger. This is not the story that appeared in the local newspapers on May 3rd, 2006, or ever for that matter. And even though inattention is the biggest problem on our roads today, it doesn't seem to get the press that alcohol does. On Tuesday, May 2nd, 2006, at 5:50 p.m., my daughter, Danielle Terrell Seiler, and her passenger were killed when her car was T-boned by a truck that swerved into the right lane of northbound Highway 65 at Klondike as she tried to cross the highway. The police and media suggested that drugs and alcohol consumption by my daughter were the probable cause of the crash. The autopsy, however, did not support their theory. Although the Star and Tribune did print a one-paragraph correction a few weeks later, they never told the real story, and there is no indication that the police ever looked back. One might think from all of the press that alcohol is a main factor in highway accidents and fatalities. The truth, however, is that inattention is a much larger problem than alcohol. In fact, inattention is the cause between 80 and 90% of the time. Refer to DOT HS 810594. Knowing that weekends and holidays and after dark account for most alcohol-related arrests, I think it's safe to say alcohol is almost never a factor on weekdays during late daylight hours. One has to assume the people we hire to protect and to serve are aware that inattention is the main cause of collisions on our highways. After all, it is their job. One would also expect that they would apply that knowledge to any investigation or questioning while doing their job. In this case, it looks like the police decided to ignore the most likely cause and instead focus on the least likely cause. The driver of the big red truck that killed two people not only has a very disturbing driving record, but also told the police that rather than watching the road ahead of him as he approached a busy intersection during rush hour, he was watching a truck that had crossed Highway 65 and that he was reading the sign on the truck. He also stated he did not see where the car that he T-boned came from or see any of the other cars also at that intersection. Both statements are admission of inattention. His truck was a 2003 four-door, four-wheel drive, full-size Dodge Ram that has a line of vision over 6 feet off of the ground, a bird's-eye view of the road ahead. All he had to do was look. True, there was a case of beer in the back seat of my daughter's car, a 1999 Ford Contour. Out of the 24 cans, 6 cans were open. Since there were only 2 passengers in the car, one might think that the people we hire to protect and to serve would probably be curious as to why there were 6 open cans and inspect them closely. If they would have done that, they would have seen that the cans had exploded from impact. Instead, they decided to thoroughly search the trunk of her car, which was full of her personal belongings. Buried in the trunk of the car, they found her jewelry box. In the jewelry box, they reportedly found a small amount of what may have been marijuana. The police report said that there was about a 12-pack of beer in my daughter's car, and some cans were empty, and some were shared from the collision. Obviously, no one from the police department inspected, fingerprinted, or even counted the cans of beer, let alone applied their knowledge on the low probability that this collision was alcohol related. And even though there was no access to the trunk from the passenger compartment, the police decided that the small amount of what may have been pot was somehow pertinent and newsworthy, even though it obviously was not a factor in the collision. On May 3rd, for some reason, a new detective that had not been on the scene was put in charge of the investigation. His reports show that he conducted most of his interviews over the phone before getting written reports from officers who were on the scene. Even after getting the results of the blood test, the detective did not bother taking the 15-minute drive to interview the driver of the big red truck in person. You heard that right. The detective in charge of this investigation never bothered to interview the man in person after killing two people. Eventually, the police came to the conclusion that my daughter was more at fault, and no charges were filed against the driver of the big red truck. Much of the information I have on the driver of the big red truck was in the public records at Anoka County City Hall. The DUI, the road rage, which involved a pregnant woman on Highway 65 in Blaine. I believe the personal injury probably settled out of court, as I was not able to get many details, other than the name of the injured woman. As for his speeding tickets, some of that information came from deposition. He tried to shrug it off as kids will be kids, but he was a long way from being a kid in 2002 when he got a ticket for doing 82 miles an hour in a 65 zone. He was also sentenced to court-ordered anger management in 2008, not related, but it does paint a picture. I have also heard two stories about this individual from reliable people. Neither story involves driving, but both give some insight into his personality. The first story was told to me by a member of the Forest Lake Country Club, where a charity golf event took place. The individual in question was asked to leave after causing two disturbances in the same day. The first one was on the golf course involving a young girl driving the drink cart. The second disturbance was at dinner that evening. In the second story, this individual was at White Castle early one morning. He demanded the manager call the police on a couple of kids in the parking lot. When the manager shrugged him off, he yelled, "Do you know who I am?" Which leads me to the reason I made this video. He may act like Ted Kennedy, drive like Ted Kennedy, and think he's pretty special, but outside of Anoka County, I doubt if anybody knows or cares who he is. He does seem to be connected to someone high up on the food chain in Anoka County, though. My guess is that he married into it, but I don't know that for sure. Someone out there does know. An employee at Refuge or Hidden Haven Golf Course, or maybe Forest Lake Country Club, a neighbor, a city employee, or maybe a retired cop. Someone out there knows who this guy is and who he knows. And if you do, please respond to the email address given.